Alright everybody, welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. You can see that I have gotten all of the parts clean for this transmission. It's part 2. We're going to start getting things put back together. Let's get into it. So it's a few days after I left off in the last video. I've been down here in the workshop. I've been getting things tidied and put away, alternating with cleaning parts. I've got everything for one transmission clean. I picked all the best pieces from the two. So I found on the transmission that was in the truck, the input shaft, well, I'll see if I can show you here. I don't know if you can really, it doesn't really show up on the camera, but these splines are worn. So I didn't want to use that one, especially in this truck that's going to be doing a lot of, I mean, it's pretty much entire life is towing a trailer. So I didn't want to put worn input splines in, so I'm not using that. I also used the rear ring bearing slash parking gate gear from the rebuilt transmission, the one that was in the truck. Long story short, like I said, I picked the best pieces between the two transmissions. Everything else in both transmissions looked good. Like I showed before, the clutch packs were burned up and a couple clutches were burned up, but everything else looked good. No damage, no excessive wear, nothing like that. Even the pumps. Surprisingly, the pumps in both transmissions still looked good. Now what I did find in the pump from this transmission, the one that was in the truck, developed a front seal leak, and then, like I said, led to what would certainly have been failure. And this is that front pump half. But right here is where that front main seal goes. And right behind it is your torque converter support bushing. And you can see down here at the bottom, there's a little port. Now this goes back to the transmission pan. It allows any transmission fluid that comes past the bushing toward the pump to drain back to the pan. Well, what I found when I took this apart, this bushing was driven too far into the pump, too far forward, which caused it to partially block this little return port. And when that happens, you get two problems. The first problem you'll have is fluid can't return to the port fast enough, so it will start to push past the seal. And I think that had been happening for a while because I had noticed an intermittent drip coming from the torque converter cover. But I mean, I wasn't going to take it apart for an intermittent drip. The second problem, that as that happens more and more and more, eventually it will fill that entire space, this entire space behind the seal, with fluid, and then it won't allow fluid to flow through and keep that bushing lubricated. And then you kind of get a spiraling effect. If the bushing doesn't get lubricated, you get friction, then it'll rub off pieces of the bushing. Those pieces almost always start to block up that drain hole, and then your problem gets worse, etc., etc. So I think I'm about 95% sure that was the cause of our problem. That bushing was driven too far forward, it partially blocked that drain hole, and it just continued to get worse over time until ultimate failure of the seal and bushing, like seen here. The bushing got too much play in it, which allowed the torque converter to just rub the seal away until there wasn't enough left to seal it anymore. So glad I found that. We can fix that. We will install that bushing correctly when we put everything back together, and we'll have a good transmission. I'm waiting for my rebuild kit to get here, but I'll show you all the other parts. Everything except the actual rebuild overhaul kit has gotten here. Okay, so parts that I'm putting into this thing. First and foremost, I only replace these if I find that they're leaking. And the common failure, the common leak is they will start to leak from behind through into the connector here. And transmission fluid does conduct electricity. So you get fluid in here, it causes short circuits, things to not happen when they're supposed to, it causes problems. The one in the transmission was leaking, so replacement wire harness. Now I also have here, this is a no walkout case bushing for the output, supports the output shaft of the transmission. The rebuilt transmission already had one in it, the transmission that was in the truck. The transmission, my core was an OEM, it had never been a part, it did not. I always go to this upgrade to this no walkout case bushing. It just makes sense to do, but it's also required for the next upgrade I'm doing, which is converting the rear output to roller. From the factory, the 4L80 rear output, the thrust angle of it has a bushing, and you can convert it to a roller bearing. So the no walkout bushing that supports it rotationally is also the locator for the bearing in the thrust direction. I have a new adapter to transfer case gasket. These, they almost always rip and tear when you take it apart. They're only a few bucks, worthwhile to replace to make sure you don't get leaks. And this is a Transgo Performance 4L80E HD2 reprogramming kit. I put these in every 4L80 transmission I rebuild. Whether they're performance or just a driver or whatever it may be. I've said this in almost all my transmission videos at one point or another. The faster you can make your clutches engage, meaning go from not under pressure to under full clamp, the less heat you will develop in your transmission. The less heat you develop in your transmission, the longer it will live. And that's what I have for this thing. Now, like I said, I am still waiting for my overhaul kit. The overhaul kit has literally every wear component in the transmission. New clutches, new steels, new bands, all new lip seals, all new gaskets, all new bearing seals, all new races, all new bushings. It has new bonded pistons. Oh, it comes with, it has the new rubber seal for where the transmission bolts to the transfer case adapter, a couple new springs, like everything in the transmission that will wear out under normal operation, this kit includes. And I'll show you that when it gets here. And hopefully that'll be here tomorrow and I can start putting this thing back together in the evenings this week. Right now, I have a small task to do. If you remember, I had one of the exhaust manifold studs that I had to extract. Well, I've got new studs. This is just a Dorman kit. You get 6 studs and 6 nuts. I'm only going to replace the one that I had to remove. And it's pretty simple. The old one is already out, so I'm going to run a tap up through that hole just to make sure the threads are in good shape. And then I'm going to put some red Loctite on one of these studs and thread it back in there. And that repair will be complete. I'm going to try to give you guys a little first-person view of what I'm doing in here. It's nice being able to stick my head up in the transmission tunnel. But you can see, here's the other 2 studs. And then here's where the 3rd stud was that I had to extract. So I got my tap. This is an M10 by 1.5 thread. So I've got it started. It's tight up in there. Give it a little lube. And then I've got a little adjustable wrench here. There we go. I'm just turning it. Just trying to clean those threads out. Alright, so I've got my tap all the way up, all the way through. It's spinning much easier now. So I back it back out. Primary goal here was just to get the threads cleaned up. There we go. You can see all the gunk it got out of there. Spray a little brake clean up in there. Give that a minute to dry. So to get this thing reinstalled, or get this new one installed here, using the old double nut trick. Just take two nuts, tighten them against each other. That'll give you a good way to turn your stud. And I guess we're gonna use the last little bit of a few drops out of this Loctite that I'm gonna need to throw away now because the bottle broke. There we go, some red Loctite. We'll see if we can get it threaded in there. There we go. Didn't even need the double nut. I'll grab my wrenches, take the nuts back off, and then we'll let that Loctite cure. And by the time we're ready to put everything back together, it should be good to go. Little tip, something to check if you're ever removing, replacing, installing a 4L80E, check your flex plate. These things have a habit of cracking around this circumference here and between the bolts. So anytime you have a chance and you're up in here, make sure you check your flex plate for any cracks or anything. And this one looks good. No cracks, no nothing. So happy with that too. Now I just need to wait for my rebuild kit to get here so I can start putting that transmission back together. It's Tuesday evening. I just got the kids to bed. I'm out here. My transmission rebuild kit came yesterday. I wasn't able to get out here yesterday, but I am able tonight. So I'm gonna get started on putting this transmission back together. When I do this, once I've got everything clean, the next thing I like to do is get all of my bushings replaced. So my rebuild kit, and I had mentioned this before, but it's a very complete kit. You can buy varying levels of completeness. You don't have to buy this one. But this comes with every wear component in the transmission. Lip seals, gaskets, rubber seals, O-rings, all of the bushings. Again, the round bushings. All new clutches and steels, all new frictions, new sprags and roller clutches, new bonded pistons, new roller bearings, new bands. It even comes with a new filter. So it has everything you need, minus any possible hard parts that may be damaged from your failure to rebuild your automatic transmission. In a stock format, I should say that, in a stock format. I'm gonna be making some upgrades. That's why I got the shift kit. That's why I have the no walkout rear bushing. And that's where I'm gonna start on this. So replacing bushings, most of the bushings in this thing are very simple to do. You will need some kind of bushing driver to install the new ones without damaging them. But you don't need any special tools to remove the old ones. So I'm gonna try to set up here. I'm gonna start with the rear bushing in the case. Like I said, that's the no walkout bushing that I like to upgrade to, especially if I'm going to be going to the rollerized rear output instead of just the bushing rear output. So let me set the camera up here where you can see me and I'll get going on this. Okay, I've got my bushing driver set here. First step, obviously, is find the correct size driver for the bushing you're trying to remove. And usually it's just match it up. I can use my new bushing here to get close. And the idea on these is you want to be as close to the size, the OD of your bushing, but preferably just a teensy tiny bit smaller. So I think this 54 is going to work. I'm going to sit it onto the driver itself here. And see if we've got a good match. What I don't want to happen is I don't want my bushing driver to gall up the case. I want to push on the bushing itself, but not the actual transmission case. I think this one's going to be the ticket for me. So, there we go. There's our old bushing out. Voila. And these bushings, like, they don't look terrible to me, but they definitely have a little bit of wear on them. There's definitely been some schmutz and some schmoo that's gone through this, which we know because we took it apart and found how bad it looked inside. So replacing these bushings is a good idea. If you're rebuilding a transmission at home and the bushings don't look like they need to be replaced, or you're just not ready to do it, you can probably get away with leaving the bushings in there that were already in there. So now I've got my no walkout bushing. Now this needs to be driven in from inside the transmission. But before I do that, let's see here, I'll show you. So, down here at the bottom of this bore, we've got basically 3 steps in this bore. And we've got our smallest diameter, which is where the bushing presses into. We've got then a slightly larger diameter that has a drain hole back to the transmission pan. And then we have a slightly larger still diameter where our seal presses in and then is retained with a snap ring. Now this middle diameter, we need to make sure that that drain hole is unobstructed. And the no walkout bushing, as you can see here, is deeper than the stock bushing. So to prevent this no walkout bushing from obstructing that drain hole, I'm going to use my die grinder and put just a little notch, a little U shape in the back of this bushing. And then I'm going to line it up with the drain hole at the bottom of the case. And that way I'll know that my bushing is not obstructing my transmission fluid's ability to return back to the pan. This is important because if you get fluid building up under pressure behind your seal because it's not able to return back to the pan, it'll blow your seal out. And all your transmission fluid is going to blow out into the transmission to transfer case adapter and then either start leaking on you or end up in your transfer case. It's going to find a way out. We need to keep the transmission fluid in the transmission. So I'm going to make that little notch with my die grinder real quick, and then we'll get this bushing driven in there where it goes. So I got my little notch made in my bushing. I give myself a Sharpie mark on the front side because this needs to be driven in from inside the case. Just get my bushing driver. I now have a driver on it that is the size of the OD, so I'm pushing flat against it. I'll line my mark up with the drain hole and drive it down in there. A little bit of an extension helps. case. Got my little groove lined up right with the drain hole. Before I go put this back in my pile of clean parts, I'm going to put my new seal and the snap ring in also. There we go. Rear bushing and rear seal installed. I'll move on. For sake of not making this video 15 hours long, I'm gonna just go through and all the bushings that I can simply press out and drive in the new ones. I'm just gonna bang out, get those done. And then when I come to one of the other style bushings, I'll show you that. All right, so moving along. Now I've got another style bushing. Now this is just a round band style bushing, ring style bushing. But you'll notice this one you can't access from both sides, and this is on the output shaft. You only have access to it from one side. Now I am fortunate enough that I stumbled across the tool one day and it was worth it to me to buy it. But I realize probably 90% of people watching this video, you're not gonna have this tool. And it's basically, I think it's called an inside bushing puller or a pilot bearing puller, because it works really well for pilot bearings also. But the way it works is you've got this mandrel that you can fit down inside of your bushing or pilot bearing, whatever you need to pull. You tighten the bolt down and that expands these three fingers so they will grab the back side of the bushing. And then you can either use the slide hammer or the little puller legs to then pull the bushing out. And that's the way I'm gonna do it. Before I found this tool, the job can be done with a punch. Get yourself a small punch like so. And most of the time, these bushings will have a seam. And I'll show you on this one, on the new one. If you can see it here, there's a little seam. It's kind of like an interlock puzzle piece. Now the way to do this if you don't have the tool is find that seam. I think I see it over here. And what you're going to try to do is get that seam to break by separating it from the housing. And that will relieve enough of the tension the press fit, if you will, that you can then slide that bushing out like so. Now, two important things to note. Obviously, this bushing is now destroyed. So before you use this method, make sure you match up the replacement bushing that is the correct outside diameter. You also need to make sure you match up the width of the bushing. Now, most of the kits I've come across, the bushings are all pretty specific to where they go. These two bushings are the same diameter, but you'll see one is wider than the other. And the wider one matches the bushing I just removed. So this is the one that goes back in that place. Installation is the same as the last one. I'll get my bushing driver out, I'll match it up, and then I'll get this bushing driven down in where it belongs. So if you don't have the fancy inside bushing, inside pilot bearing puller tool, you need yourself a nice little sharp punch and a hammer. You should be able to get it out. When you do that way, just be careful. You really do not want to scar up your inside diameter of whatever piece you're removing that from. And you don't want, because that will change the working diameter. So I'm going to get this one pushed back in, and then I'm going to keep on jiving along until I hit another style bushing that I need to show you how to do. Alright, so I'm doing another inside bushing with no access. I figured I'd show you how this tool works. So I've got my little expanding fingers down inside the bushing. Now I'm getting my little legs here down so they make contact with the housing. And I hold my bolt still, turn my little nut, and it pulls the bushing right up out of the hole. Now keep in mind, if you do this method, if you do have one of these also, you don't want to tighten this so much that it expands the fingers out and they gall up the bore for the bushing to press into. You just want to be enough that it grabs the back of the bushing, but isn't pushed all the way up against the bore. The nice thing about this is now my bushing isn't all destroyed, so I can very easily match it up to my new bushing. So, just like the other, removal or replacement, just drive the new one down in there. Try to make sure that you match up the depth, and you don't put it too far in or not far enough. Pay attention to that, because some of these bushings need to be driven to a very specific depth to make sure that they're not blocking oil passages or something like that. So, I'm gonna keep going, I'll bring you back. All right, so I've been moving right through on these bushings. So far, no problems. I've got most of them done actually, but now I'm through the center support, and this is the only bushing in the transmission that I can't find or haven't thought of a way to replace it without a press, largely just because of the size of it. This is the size of this bushing. It goes all the way through the center. It's one piece, and it needs to be clocked correctly because there's oil passages in it that you need to get lined up. So the way I've done this every time so far, and I've never had a problem yet, is I get my new bushing lined up with my old bushing, so I know my holes are clocked in the right positions, and then I make some marks with a Sharpie on the outside. Now when I'm ready to push it back together, all I gotta do is just line my marks up and push the new one in. But the challenge first is getting the old one pushed out. So I'm going to take it over to the press, try to get the old one pushed out of there without damaging anything, and then get the new one pressed in. Well, everybody, it's creeping up on 11 o'clock. I made my goal for the night. I've got a pile of used bushings, worn out bushings here on the workbench. I've got all new bushings in all my pieces here. So we're prepped and ready to start putting things back together. I think I'll have time to get down here tomorrow and work on it. But if not tomorrow, then probably the next day. But yeah, there's it's a lot of pieces. Not the first rodeo though. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll start putting this thing back together, hopefully. Well, everybody, it's Wednesday night now. It's just about 8 o'clock, and I'm geared up to start putting this transmission back together. Now, I'm gonna do one final cleaning before I start putting this thing back together. And basically what that is I've got some places on these faces that are a little corroded. I'm gonna get those cleaned up. I'm gonna go over the gasket surface with a razor blade to get that cleaned up. Then I'm gonna spray this whole thing down with brake clean. Then I'm gonna blow the whole thing dry with compressed air. And that'll be as clean as I can get it. And then I'll start stacking pieces back into it. Like I mentioned in the first video of this series, reassembly on this thing, it's all right out of the manual. The ATSG service manual. And this is for the 4L80E. Covers everything: disassembly, reassembly, torque specs, gaskets, bearings, the whole deal. Everything you need to know about this transmission is in here. You can see mine's coming apart because it's got a lot of use on it. But I'm just gonna follow these instructions to get this thing put back together. And I'm also gonna be interjecting or including the portions of the shift kit instructions where those are necessary. So I'm probably not gonna do a ton of like nitty gritty detail on how to do this, just because the video would be like 6 hours long if I did that. And I can't tell you anything that you can't get out of the manual. So I'm gonna do this final clean, get that case to where I'm happy with it, and then I'll start stacking stuff back into it, and I'll show you what I'm doing along the way. All right, guys, I made a mistake, and I wanna show you so you don't make the same mistake if you're doing this. So from the factory, down at the very back of the case there, you have a shim and then a thrust washer. And I am converting that to a roller bearing. Now, when I was putting all the bushings in, I showed you and said, drive the case saver bushing in. Well, what I forgot and just realized as I was trying to install that rear roller bearing is you have to put that case saver bushing in backwards, meaning from the back in. So fortunately, I was able to get it out without damaging it. So I can sit it here and I can drive it in the way it's supposed to be. And I do need to put a little notch in the lip here to allow oil to drain back down like I told you yesterday. Unfortunately, I damaged my rear seal trying to get that back out. Fortunately, again for me, I had a seal in my Bucket O 4L80 parts. So I'll be able to put the little drain back notch in this baby and then get this other spare seal that I had installed and then continue on with assembly. I got lucky there that I had a spare seal. Okay, so I got the little groove made, bushing turned around and driven in from the back, my other seal installed, and then my bearing down there. The reason the bushing needs to come from out in is because that bushing locates the bearing. It keeps it centered. So you have to have it in there. So now I can continue on with my assembly just how the instructions say. All right, everybody, it's late. I'm calling it for the night. It's a little after 11:30, and I'm gonna say I'm about a third of the way through putting this thing back together. I've got from the intermediate clutch back installed, put together. I've got my direct clutch put together and ready to drop in next, but this is usually kind of tricky because the manual wants you to use a special tool that I don't have, so I have to finagle some stuff to get it down in there, and I don't want to do it tonight. I'll putz around with it tomorrow when I'm fresh. So, like I said, I'm calling it. This takes time. I've done several transmissions and it still takes me time. So if you're gonna attempt this, don't think you're gonna do it in one evening. Like, give yourself plenty of time, read the manual, check, double check, make sure you don't miss any steps, make sure you don't miss any bushings, anything like that, because one missed piece and you're probably gonna have problems. So, calling it for tonight. I'll bring you guys back tomorrow when I get down here and hopefully finish getting this thing together. All right, everybody, it's Thursday afternoon now. I've been out here for, I think, about two and a half hours working on this thing. I'm glad I stopped when I did last night, came back to it this morning, rested, thinking clearly. I was able to make progress much faster. So I've got pretty much the whole power flow assembly back into the transmission. Everything's where it needs to be, new bushings, new seals, new races, new blah, 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 clutches, steels, frictions, all new lip seals. Everything in there is new, except for the hard parts, and all the hard parts are in like new, good, used condition. So shouldn't have to worry about anything inside of there. Should all work 100%. I have been, as I mentioned before, just following the instructions in my technical service manual, with the exception of a few little places here where I made changes inside the transmission for the shift kit. It comes with some different springs for the direct clutch drum return and a different intermediate snap ring and a few little modifications you make to the pump. Everything else is in the valve body and the separator plate. One thing I forgot to mention that I did also do is I did what's known as a dual feed modification in the direct drum. The simple version of this is that piston inside of the drum, half of it is used for third gear, 1-to-1 drive, and half of it is used for reverse when set up from the factory. Now, as you're going through here, if you remove the inner seal that divides the two piston areas, and then we're gonna make a couple changes to the valve body, that will allow you to use the entire piston for reverse and the entire piston for direct drive, third gear, which, you know, having 3 square inches of piston versus having 7 square inches of piston, that 7 square inches gives you a lot more clamping force, a lot more power to hold. It makes those gears a lot stronger. So that's a good modification to make. And I mean, you can do it more or less for free. So I really recommend that one. So I've just gotten done putting the pump all back together, all new seals and everything in there, doing my valve body pressure modifications to it. So I'm gonna take my Teflon seal resizer off of the input shaft here, lay down my pump gasket, get the new seal on the pump, and then sit the pump down in here. And that'll have the power flow assembly complete. And then I'm gonna move on and start doing the valve body work. Same thing, like I said, I'm just following instructions, guys. I'm not gonna bring you back and show you every little nook and nick and this and that I do. Because it would take me all day to do it, and I'm sure you don't want to watch a 3-hour-long video on how to do it. So I'll bring you back when I have more progress to show you. Woo, it feels good to be getting close to the end, team. So I'm about to put the valve body back on. I've gone through, I finished all the instructions in my shift kit. That's all done. Valve body is bolted back together. Now, typically, I would go through and check all the solenoids in the valve body, but I know these are good because the transmission worked fine until I ran it out of fluid. This is the valve body from the truck. So I know all those solenoids are good, and yeah, I'm gonna get the valve body put back on. I've got my check balls in place, I've got my wire harness in place. So get the valve body in, get it bolted down, torqued down, and then start sealing this thing up. So we're almost there. All right, everybody, so got it all back together. Valve body is back in place, all torqued to spec. All my wire harness is in place where it belongs, tucked up nice and neat. Everything inside is complete, ready to be covered back up. New seal or new filter. And I am reusing the factory pan gasket. This is from the donor transmission. Guys, I haven't found a gasket that seals as good as those factory gaskets do, and they're intended to be a reusable gasket. It's hard plastic impregnated with a rubber seal to seal it up. You just got to make sure that you get it clean, okay? So that's going back on there. I did have one little whoopsie. I forgot that I needed to drill this hole for part of the shift kit to allow the fluid to drain back easier. And I damaged this seal pulling it out. So I ordered a new seal. It'll be here tomorrow. I'll put my new O-ring on the front of the input shaft right here. And then I'll stick the pan on it. Just reusing a factory pan bolts, the factory magnet to go inside of it. I do like to put a little dollop of anti-seize on the transmission pan bolts just to make sure steel and aluminum, I don't want them getting galled or stuck or corroded together while this thing is being driven. And yeah, I'm out of time for today, but hopefully that seal will get here tomorrow and I can get to work on trying to get this thing back in the truck this weekend. Woo! Well, everybody, I'm wrapping up this transmission and this video. So I was able to come down yesterday afternoon with my kids. Got the transmission pan bolted on, all the last few fittings and everything put in place. Speed sensor and plug put in place and bolted in. Everything's good. And then this morning I came down. I got my rebuild data stamped in here, rebuilt with an HD2 on February 2nd, 2024. It's mostly just for my reference. I'll know for some reason, if I ever need to get this transmission out again, I'll have that right there for easy reference. So I'm gonna get the transmission to transfer case adapter bolted on the back. This thing just seals up with an O-ring and then the 6 bolts, so I'll get that on there. And then get it lifted up on the transmission jack, get the torque converter poked back in the front, and then get it slid up into the truck and all put back together, hopefully. So, like I said, that's it on this video. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully this helps you if you're rebuilding a 4L80. Again, like I didn't go into every nitty-gritty detail because it would be an hours and days long video. I'm pretty sure I've got I'm gonna say about 8, maybe 9 hours into this transmission rebuild. And given, like, I know there's people that are faster than that, but this isn't something I do every day. So I'm following the step-by-step instructions in the tech manual. If you get a tech manual, you can do it too. So again, I hope this helps you. If you're thinking about it, I hope this gives you the confidence to go ahead and go for it. And yeah, until the next video, everybody, take care.